Okay, so uh, you want to really get what went down with these apparent attempts on former President Trump's life, huh?
Yeah, and it's wild, right? You've got this whole web of political extremism, then maybe mental instability, even this strange international angle.
Seriously, it's a lot, and to be honest, even I was pretty shocked by some of the stuff we found while we were getting ready for this deep dive. Like,
Yeah.
to really get how serious this is, we got to start with that thing at Trump's golf course in Florida. Just picture it, perfect Sunday, Trump's out there having himself a relaxing round of golf.
And meanwhile, hundreds of yards away, hiding in the bushes, there's this guy just waiting there. And he's got enough firepower to supply a small army. We're talking an AK-style rifle, a high-powered scope, even a GoPro strapped to his chest.
Like straight out of a movie, right? And get this, the Secret Service, they actually spotted the sun reflecting off the barrel of his rifle. Can you believe that? Through the trees.
Mm.
But their training kicked and bam, warning shot. And the suspect bolts in an SUV.
Thankfully, Trump was fine. But you mentioned something interesting earlier, how eerily calm the suspect was during the arrest. Witnesses say he didn't put up a fight, didn't even question why they were grabbing him. It's almost like he expected this to happen.
Totally chilling. And it really makes you wonder about this guy. What was going through his head? What was his motive? But before we jump into who this guy is, let's rewind a bit to that other event, the shooting at Trump's rally back in July. It seemed unthinkable at the time.
Yeah, and it begs the question, are these two incidents totally separate, or is there some kind of pattern here? That question is a big part of why there's so much speculation and political maneuvering going on.
You got it. Now, there's some clear differences between the two situations. That July shooting, that was pure chaos, tons of people, really drives home how vulnerable these public figures are, especially with how divided things are these days. This latest thing, though, it feels more, I don't know, calculated, wouldn't you say?
No doubt. That premeditation, that's huge here. This wasn't just some random act of violence at a heated event. It seems like it was planned out carefully. Which brings us to the guy at the center of all this, Ryan Ruth.
So we've got Ryan Ruth.
Right.
And getting into his background, that was something else. Like, you start putting the pieces together, and it's like, wait a minute, this is the guy who was allegedly out there with a sniper rifle.
It really is incredible. At first glance, Ruth's story is all about activism, fighting graffiti, sticking up for Ukrainian soldiers, even spearheading affordable housing back in Hawaii. You get this image of a guy who's driven to do good, like a modern-day Don Quixote.
Yeah, exactly. He even helped some kids build a skate park. It's like, who does that and then allegedly tries to take out a former president? Those two things don't exactly go hand in hand. But when we dug a little deeper, well, things got messy.
To say the least. Because mixed in with all that seemingly good stuff, there's this other side of Ruth. A guy with a criminal record, including, get this, a conviction for possessing a weapon of mass destruction.
Okay, now that's where it gets crazy. A weapon of mass destruction. What was he doing with something like that? Sounds like something out of a movie.
It does, doesn't it? We don't know every detail of the case, but apparently back in 2002, he barricaded himself in a building, had a fully automatic weapon, the whole 9 yards, ended up in a standoff with the police. Not exactly your typical community organizer, right?
No kidding. Definitely suggests some unpredictable behavior.
Yeah, and it seems like it escalated in recent years, especially after Russia invaded Ukraine. Ruth, he got fixated on that whole thing, even went to Kiev, wanted to join the fight.
But they turned him down, right? Something
Yeah.
about his age and not having any military experience.
Oh, exactly. But instead of accepting it, he goes all in on this mission to get foreign fighters for Ukraine. Specifically, he was after those Afghan soldiers who had bailed when the Taliban took over. Even started a website, Fight for Ukraine, full of these big and honestly illegal plans. Forging documents, trying to use U.S. military planes to get fighters into Poland. It was a recipe for disaster.
So we have a guy who's unpredictable, obsessed with this war, and dabbling in illegal stuff. I'm starting to see the connection to the assassination attempts, but it still feels like a big leap.
You're right, it is. And that's where his self-published book, Ukraine's Unwinnable War, comes in. Remember those reports? Disturbing stuff, rambling rants.
Oh, yeah, that definitely caught my attention. Given his unique history, I had to know more of what kind of stuff was he ranting about.
Well, picture this political commentary, conspiracy theories, and personal attacks all mashed together, written in this stream of consciousness style. He goes after everyone, world leaders, celebrities, but he saves his worst for Donald Trump.
Not a fan. Got it. But that doesn't automatically make him a potential assassin, does it? Plenty of people have strong opinions. Thankfully, most don't, you know.
Of course, of course. But there's this one part that's really chilling, especially now. Ruth, he's talking directly to Iran, apologizing for Trump pulling out of that nuclear deal. And then he says, and this is a direct quote, "You are free to assassinate Trump."
Whoa. Okay, that's a little more than just an opinion. That's stepping into dangerous territory. So is he taking orders from Iran? Are they behind all of this?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And so far, there's zero evidence linking Ruth to the Iranian government. But that statement, his increasingly erratic behavior, the attempts on Trump's life, it's a really disturbing picture.
It is.
Yeah.
But it's not just his actions that are raising red flags, right? This whole thing has ignited a firestorm about political rhetoric and if it's causing violence. What does this mean for, the future of our democracy?
You hit the nail on the head. It's not just what happened at the golf course or the rally. It's how people are reacting to it, the stories being told, the accusations flying around. And with things as divided as they are now, it's a very dangerous situation.
So we've gotten into these attempts on Trump's life and then really dove into Ryan Ruth's background. And let me tell you, that was a lot. But where it really gets interesting and honestly pretty concerning is how this is all playing out in the political world.
Yeah, it's never just about the event itself, is it? It becomes about the reactions, the different interpretations, how these incidents get used to push a certain narrative.
For sure. And, it's interesting. Right off the bat, Trump's response to this golf course thing was surprisingly kind of tame.
Right, that first statement was pretty low-key, thanked the Secret Service, assured everyone he was safe. Almost, well, presidential, you could say.
Yeah, which makes sense. Someone just allegedly took aim at him with a rifle. But then things change, right?
Yeah, definitely did. Later that week, Fox News interview, he goes on the attack, starts directly blaming Biden and Harris, saying they're inciting violence with all their talk.
Wait, hold on. He's blaming them because someone allegedly tried to assassinate him.
That's exactly what he's saying. He's arguing that when they go around saying he's a threat to democracy, it's like a dog whistle to those more extreme supporters he's got. Like, they're basically giving them permission to, take things into their own hands.
Now, what about his base? Are they buying this?
Hook, line, and sinker. His own running mate, J.D. Vance, even came out and said, and this is a direct quote, "Nobody's trying to assassinate Joe Biden. Nobody's trying to assassinate Kamala Harris," strongly implying that this means the left is the real problem.
Well, that's one way to look at it, I guess. But isn't that kind of flawed logic?
Yeah.
Just because something hasn't happened doesn't mean it can't, or that one side's naturally more prone to violence than the other.
Exactly. It's so important to be able to separate correlation from causation. Just because a few individuals might get riled up by strong words doesn't mean you can draw a straight line back to, say, people speaking out against injustice or even dangerous ideologies.
Well, you can't blame the weatherman when a hurricane hits. So how are the Democrats responding to all this?
It's a tightrope walk, that's for sure. They're condemning the violence, obviously, but also pushing back against Trump's accusations. They're bringing up his history of inflammatory rhetoric, his baseless claims about election fraud.
His whole thing about the 2020 election being stolen.
Right. Their point is that kind of talk, it creates this climate of fear and distrust that, well, can have real-world consequences.
And they're not letting other people off the hook, are they?
Yeah.
It's not just Trump in their sights.
Not at all. They're expanding the conversation to include things like threats against Dr. Fauci, those election workers, even elected officials themselves. It's a broader issue about the erosion of democratic norms and violence becoming, well, almost expected in our political discourse.
And we'd be remiss not to mention the role of social media in all of this. It's like
What?
throwing gasoline on an already raging fire.
Totally. Even Elon Musk jumped into the fray, tweeting and then deleting a comment about the lack of attempts on Biden's or Harris's lives. Whether he meant to or not, it just feeds into this sense of conspiracy and division.
It's a lot to process. And honestly, it feels like we're just scratching the surface. We've got this Ryan Ruth, a mystery wrapped in an enigma, two separate incidents that shook the nation, and this political firestorm that just won't quit.
And maybe the most unsettling part of it all is that we don't have a clear answer to the big question, why? Why would Ruth do this? Was it purely political? Was it mental instability? Or some perfect storm of factors that we just can't grasp? We may never know for sure.
It really makes you think, in a world where political divides run this deep and inflammatory rhetoric spreads like wildfire online, how do we, as a society, even begin to address the root causes of violence and protect the very foundations of our democracy? It's a question we all need to grapple with. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll be back next week with another look behind the headlines.